listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, and this is The Backstory. So once again, our intrepid producer Rod has done a great job. Hey Rod, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Lee. How about yourself?
I'm fine. You know, I talked to a divorce lawyer for about an hour. That's always fun.
Well, I hope we're not breaking up, but no, I'm just joking. I hope everything works out with that.
No. You know, here's what it is. And allow me to complain about the system for one moment. And the guy I talked to, perfectly nice guy, competent professional. But you know what? I don't think lawyers improve relationships at all. Does that make, including relationships that are changing, right? Does that make sense?
No, I used to work directly behind or in front of a family court, and you rarely ever saw anybody leave happy.
No, right, and I understand that there's issues, and sometimes you do need an attorney, but generally speaking, what I've learned is that trying to do this pro se, because here's the thing. In the scheme of things, would you rather have your money go to, so let's say you've got $500 cash money, which doesn't buy you much lawyer, by the way. I'm just saying. But let's say you got $500 cash money in your hands right now, and you got two choices. You can give the money to your kids or to some lawyer. In the normal scheme of things, you'd give it to your kids, right?
Of course.
That's not the way the system works. And the system actually penalizes you unless you've given money to a lawyer. Because when you give money when you get that $500, I'll put it like this. So much money has been spent on the other side. My future ex-wife has spent so much on a lawyer. And she spent, I know, zero on, she complains about spending any money on anything else, on the car payments, anything. And so to me, the problem is at a certain point you have to break down and go, you know what? I can complain about the system. You know, you've heard the phrase, Rod, don't hate the player, hate the game. Of course, you heard that, right?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so I hate the game. Let me just say that. There's nothing against any individual player, like the lawyers. But the game is the courts penalize you unless you have a lawyer, which is silly, in a sense. It doesn't benefit the kids. That's where they should be putting their priority, not on whether you've hired a lawyer. So I'm breaking down and I'm hiring a lawyer. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, no, I've been there. I've seen it. I've seen other family members go through it. Unfortunately, this is how the system is right now. But we need to fight to make it more simpler and more affection for the children, for the family.
Yes, right, and it's unfortunate. But anyway, I had a good conversation with a lawyer, but it's hard for me to say that without throwing up on my mouth a little bit, because a good conversation with a lawyer means I have a competent lawyer who I think will do a good job representing my interest in this adversarial system, but I'm not convinced that, I do have problems with the system writ large. But great show today you put together, Rod. Let's talk about that. John Schweppe will be joining us in the first hour. And there's some news on the tech and journalism front we'll be talking to John about, among other things. Then, in the second hour, I love to get people who are actually someplace. You know what I'm saying, Rod? Like If somebody was, this is why I love when we get Mark Sloboda on or Peter Oliver, because he's been places, right? He's not just talking about Russia, he's in Russia in Mark's case. Peter was there for a while. So joining us, we've been talking about this freedom rally, the truckers' convoy. We've been talking about it, but I'll tell you who was there. Our guest in the second hour, Andrew Lawton, will be joining us. And we're going to find out, we've got that clip of Justin Trudeau, right?
We'll have it, but yeah.
Yeah. Justin Trudeau is out making a lot of accusations. And I wasn't there. So maybe the truckers' rally was full of racist veteran haters. Russian influence. Did you see that, by the way, that you must have, that obviously the truckers' convoy was a Russian plot? How'd you do that, Rod?
I don't know, but I think it's just more ridiculousness.
It is, and we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the latest in the Russia-Ukraine thing, speaking of ridiculousness, and taking your calls, 202-521-1320. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. Okay, so a couple of things I want to talk about as we get into this Russia-Ukraine thing. But first, I got to mention something I failed to mention yesterday. Did you see, Rod, by any chance, there was an actual news story? In other words, this is not some joke or a prank, or it's a little early for April Fools. It is Black History Month, but this has nothing to do with that. Although I do like the stand-up who points out that Black History Month is also the shortest month. You've heard that, I'm sure, Rod.
Right, yeah.
If you're going to pick one month, let's make it the short month. But there was an actual headline that aliens, did you see this one? That aliens have not made contact with Earth because of Russia. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see that one. No, I didn't see it.
Okay. It would sound like, see, you're laughing, and you're right to laugh. It sounds like a joke, but it was in the paper. It was in one of the UK papers that aliens have not made contact because of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. They don't want to. It's all Russia's fault that ET is not phoned home, is what they're saying. Now, think about how insane that is. I'll tell you what else is insane. Trending, the number one trending thing in Moments or whatever last night on Twitter was a story. It was Reuters, respected news organization, Reuters, did a fact check. So there was a meme out, and here's the way it went. It was a clip from The Simpsons in 1999. You know The Simpsons, Rod, not personally, but you know the show The Simpsons. Homer, Marge, Lisa, etc. Bart. You know The Simpsons.
Yep.
And there was
can't forget Maggie.
And there was a clip, and the title was The Simpsons Predicted the Truckers' Convoy. And it showed a clip. Now, when you see something like that, let me ask you, Rod, do you think that they're saying literally that The Simpsons predicted it? Or is it common in meme parlance to say whatever predicted, Jim Carrey predicted the Afghan pullout debacle, and then they show a scene from Dumb and Dumber, let's say, right? And it's Jim Carrey,
right,
and it's something that sort of relates to it. You don't think, when you've seen those memes a zillion times, everyone has, right? But you have specifically,
yes,
right?
But, yeah, a famous one would be Donald Trump coming down the escalator, and The Simpsons had an episode with that when he ran for president. So a lot of people have, I don't know. Some people believe that it is predictive programming or whatever you may be. But what you're talking about from Reuters, do I think they think it's serious, or do they take it serious? In 2020.
They expended resources to do a fact check, and they said definitively that, in fact, The Simpsons did not predict the future in 1999 about the truckers' convoy. Because think about what you would have had to have known in 1999. You would have had to have known that the COVID-19 pandemic was coming. Then you would have had to have known how Canada would react, and the truckers would have a convoy. You'd literally have to be psychic to have figured that out, right? You'd have mystical powers in 1999, right? That's the only way the writers at The Simpsons could have known the truckers' rally was coming. And by the way, if they had those powers, I don't think they would have been writing The Simpsons. They would have been betting on sporting events in the future, like Biff from Back to the Future, right? That's how you make your money. If you can predict the future, you don't write cartoons for a living to predict a Canadian trucker rally. So they,
right.
You see what I'm saying? I'm just saying, anybody who's out there, pay attention. I'm going to help you. If you're out there and you have psychic abilities, if you have proven to yourself that you know how to predict the future, don't try to get a job as an animation writer. Go make money by betting on sports events. Like, who's going to win the Super Bowl between whoever the hell's playing? You said it's the Rams and the Bengals? Is that what it is?
Yes, the Rams and the Bengals, yeah.
See, I didn't even know that. Yesterday I said it was 49ers. I knew it was some California team. Is Joe Montana, does he still play?
No, I don't think. He might play foosball, but not football.
Okay, so he's not. Okay. So again, but if you have psychic abilities and can remember the names of teams and players, go bet on sports. In fact, don't have any job. Make that your job, is betting and waiting. You follow me? Because if you're a psychic, I'll put it like this. You remember the classic TV show, Rod, Bewitched, with Samantha?
Right.
Samantha the witch. And her husband, Darren, who mysteriously changed one season, but let's leave that aside, is literally the stupidest person ever on TV. Because Elizabeth Montgomery, who played Samantha Stevens, the witch on Bewitched, first off, she was beautiful. Beautiful woman, right? So imagine, Rod, you've got a beautiful wife, and you found out that she has magical powers. Would you spend the rest of the marriage grousing at her? You see what I'm saying?
No.
When you've got a hot wife who can also fidget her nose and make things appear and disappear, don't be grouchy all the time, which Darren was, both of them. They were always grouchy. Sam, right? Calm down. You've got a hot wife who's magic. Count your blessings. Half of that equation, you should count your blessings. Because Darren was not hot. Ladies, tell me I'm wrong. Have you ever heard of a woman who was attracted to either Darren on Bewitched ever? One of them, in fact, Dick Sargent, turned out to be gay. He was gay the whole time he was married to Samantha. Maybe that's why he was grouchy. I'm not saying, I'm just saying that may be the problem he was having. But so Reuters actually, back to The Simpsons, someone put out a Simpsons meme, and Reuters, they have people at Reuters who are fact checkers, who check facts. So they called up one of their fact-checking employees and said, can you get on this? Some people are saying that The Simpsons predicted this. Can you get to the bottom of this? I wouldn't have had to do, and I like doing research, Rod. Guess how much research I would have had it done to figure that one out?
Zero.
Zero research is the right number. That's the correct answer. Because I could just go, wait a second. Are you really freaking asking me to check whether the Simpsons predicted the Canadian truckers rally? Because no, they didn't. Because that's, as I said in a tweet last night, metaphysically absurd. What? I would have slapped my boss at Reuters. This is why I don't work at Reuters. But seriously, think of how stupid that is, that they did a fact check. And then they pointed out that it was digitally altered. Do you know what that means? Edited. And see, here's the thing. When you say something was done digitally, the question I'm going to ask Rod is, as opposed to what? Well, Saul, you're multifaceted. What's sort of the opposite of digital in this context?
Analog.
Analog, right. That would be one. And that's valid. So,
or crayons.
Or crayons. Or someone painted. Someone took crayons or paint or something like that. And they went in and they altered, or they just took a pencil and they drew their own version of The Simpsons. Any alterations you make to something now are going to be, particularly when you're working in video, are going to be digital. Because if it was analog, it would probably be a pixel vision, maybe VHS tape, something like that. But the point, to use the word digital, they were trying to use it, I think, so they could say scarily, you know, it's digitally altered. That's the only way you alter video now is digitally. That's it. You wouldn't go in and draw it by hand. See, and that's why the opposite thing, this is why, Saul, a joke I make sometimes is I don't have an electric blanket, I have an acoustic blanket, right? Because acoustic is the opposite of electric. You see what I did there?
I see what you did there.
With guitars. It doesn't apply to blankets. That's why it's funny. Aha. But anyway, this Reuters thing is literally the stupidest thing. The fact that they had a fact check, they said fact check, and they treated it like it was serious. Like, we got to the bottom of this one. The Simpsons did not predict the Canadian truckers rally in 1999. Well, thanks, Reuters. You suck. You're an example of why the media sucks. Now, another example is this Russia-Ukraine thing. Now, Vladimir Putin today, it's in the headlines, met with Viktor Orban from Hungary. They had talks. And Putin has not said anything about the ridiculous, ginned-up story where the U.S., I'm going to put it bluntly, the U.S. is lying and saying that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. And they've been saying it since November. Since around Turkey Day, they've been saying that any second, Russia's about to invade Ukraine. Now, by the way, I have a question for you, Rod. Do you think the U.S. military is about to invade Virginia?
No.
Well, here's what I'm worried about. The military has they have over 50,000 troops amassed on the Virginia border, active duty troops, over 250,000 people there. Now, when I say the Virginia border, I mean Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Because if you look on a map, Fort Bragg is about as far from Virginia as Yelna, Russia is from Ukraine. It's not on the border. And I saw somebody today say they added, some news person, right on the border. So they want to be clear. They're literally, picture the border, whatever the line is, you know, where it says Ukraine on one side and Russia on the other. They wanted to be clear that the troops are right on the border. Not just they can see it over there and, you know, possibly hit a 3-iron into it or something like that. No, right on the border. But that's a lie, as I pointed out. Yelnya, Russia, where the troops are. So if and this dopey woman who's our UN rep, our UN envoy, she came out and said yesterday, I don't know if you saw this, Rod, she said, you don't have troops for nothing. If you got troops amassed, they're there for a reason. That was her argument. She can, by the way, after she's a UN envoy, I think she wants to get hired as a fact checker for Reuters because she's got that level of mentality. So if that's the case, the troops at Fort Bragg, and there's 54,000, I looked it up, Rod. There's 54,000 active duty military troops. You don't do that for no reason, do you, Rod?
No, but I saw the clip you were talking about, this woman at the UN, and we don't send our best to represent us.
No. And I can't even remember her. She's got one of those ladies. I'll put it like this. Do you like the hyphenated last name thing? When women do
there should be a reason for it. If it's just you, if there's no reason, I don't understand why you do it.
Right. I don't get it either. And you know what? Maybe, and so she's one of those women, and again, I don't want to sound like Archie Bunker grousing about 1970s feminists, but I will tell you, the hyphenated last name thing, where you're showing your independence, let's talk about what's actually going on there, shall we, Rod? Because the idea is women are showing their independence, right? That's why they use the hyphenated name. Correct? They want to show that they're not. That's the right. So
that's the premise, yeah.
Right. Let me explain something to you, ladies. I'm going to put it bluntly. You don't show you're independent by using daddy's name. You see what I'm saying? Because daddy was a dude too. So all you're showing is you're not taking your husband's name and you're keeping your daddy's name. That's not a big blow for feminism. Out of the frying pan into the fire. You've gone from one guy, the guy who's your dad, to kind of being weird with your, I don't know what else to say. But like, no, I'm not going to take your name. I need to keep dad's name because I'm a feminist. What? Now, if what you've done is taken your mom's maiden name, that would show the man. You see what I'm saying, Rod? But I don't even understand how they even thought in the 70s that that was feminism. Do you see my problem with this, Rod? Or I know I'm grousing myself, but
no, you're putting up a subject to feminists who, you know, espouse this, that if they keep the name and marry and just hyphenate it, it's some type of strength, or some type of strength for women. But like you're saying, you still, most of the time, you're still keeping your father's last name, which is a man.
What they've essentially showed is that the strength in feminism is you can find a socially acceptable way to diss your husband. Does that make sense? Because that's what it is. All you're really doing is setting up a situation where if you introduce your wife to somebody, you have to say, no, this is my wife. If your name's Bill Johnson, you get to say, this is my wife, Wendy Lipschitz Johnson, assuming her dad's name was Lipschitz. By the way, and I use the name Lipschitz, it's not a swear, it's a name. It's spelled differently. But because I've talked about this before, I knew a woman in high school, and her name was like Hilda Lipschitz. And she changed her name, Rod. Do you understand why someone named Hilda Lipschitz might change their name? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I can see that.
Except, I'm not joking. She changed her name to Wendy Lipschitz. She kept the last name. She kept the Lipschitz part. But she changed the first name. Now, I'll put it like this. If you're going to go through all the paperwork of filling out to change your name, which, by the way, you don't need to in some cases. California's got a common law right to change your name. My current future ex-wife, this is implying that I'm lucky at love and eventually have a future ex-wife. But my current future ex-wife took my name. She became Lauren Stranahan before we were married, because in California you could. And she, on the other hand, hates her dad. So she wanted to get rid of that name as soon as possible. She didn't do the opposite and keep his name just to show me. She hates me now. She's still using my name, which is fine. Go ahead. I don't care. But anyway, 202-521-1320. Ingrid, what is on your mind?
Hey, Lee. The truckers in Canada, earlier today, John and Michelle had someone on talking about that. And I couldn't call in their show, but I wanted to say pro and con him. On the one hand, he claimed to be a totally neutral observer, but he characterized COVID as the sniffles, so I think he kind of exposed himself there. But on the other hand, he was complaining that someone in Canada had taken a picture of one of the truckers who had some kind of, I don't know what, white supremacist tattoo or something, and he thought this was absurd that they had highlighted this one person as if that represented the whole group. And then he made the statement, well, nobody was doing this about the Black Lives Matter. They weren't focusing on the few people who were making anti-white comments. And so Michelle said, well, she had never seen anything in the news about any anti-white comments, which essentially she was making his point. Now, early in 2020, the first videos of violence that I saw were very, very early. They were right in front of the White House, and they're actually taken by Max Blumenthal. I saw them on his Twitter. I myself have protested dozens of times in front of the White House. I have never seen anybody try to rip a shield away from a policeman. But that early on, they were doing that. So, I saw the same thing. I was watching live footage there, and yeah, I saw somebody grab the cops were up there with a shield. Now, any cop on any circumstance, if they approach you and they've got a shield up and you grab it, you're asking for trouble at that point, I would say, right? You don't grab the shield thinking, well, he'll like this. I'm helping him. And I saw the same thing. Those protesters, and they wouldn't clear the park. And you've been over there to the park. You know that they clear that park, Ingrid, all the time, right? And not only that, all the time they'll set the boundary up on I Street so that you can't even go into the park. But as you're saying, this happened from the very early protest, and it was never reported in mainstream media. If you hadn't watched that video that night, you wouldn't even know that happened.
No, that's right. And that's why I was watching it live, because I didn't want to go down there, because I'm too old for that mess. But yes, I saw the same thing. And I've seen a lot of people who supported those protesters. The fact that I'll put it like this. When I spent days in that park when I was doing my vigil for Assange thing, where literally I would just go over there and hang out all day. And I learned a thing or two about the park there. They clear it and set up the boundary constantly, like 3 or 4 times a day. And they never explain why they're doing it. They just say, okay, everybody out. And then they put up a barricade. Right? And if I'd said to them, no, I don't want to leave, they would have arrested me. Right? They would have run me in. And it's common for them to do that. And what you don't do when the cops clear out the park is say, no, 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 I don't want to leave. And if you do, then take the consequences. This is the thing I think, great call, Ingrid. Thanks for the call. About the civil rights movement, the difference between the old civil rights movement and the new one. In the old civil rights movement, when they go sit in at the lunch counter, they expected to get arrested. They didn't whine about it. If you're doing civil disobedience, part of the point is to get arrested. They would dress nice. They would wear suits. And it was like they were going to a prom or something, knowing that they were going to be arrested. And they didn't whine about it. Getting arrested was the point. Same now, but now it's a combination of getting arrested and whining, which is not a good combination. Coming up, John Schweppe is going to join us. We'll talk about some, well, I'm iffy on it, but the journalism, high-tech stuff, all that coming up right after this on the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in the DMV. That's D.C., Maryland, Virginia. In case you're trying to get a driver's license there, we're not just there, no. We're in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. If you're driving around, listen to us. Hey, we love having you with us. Feel free to call in 202-521-1320 at some point. But right now, we are joined by a guest we've had before. We always love having John Schweppe on. Hey, John, how you doing?
I am talking to you here from the free state of Virginia, which is pretty enjoyable these days, I got to say.
Now, what you're referring to, and this is, by the way, is that we have a governor. By the way, when I say we, technically I consider Virginia my domicile still, but I haven't been there in a couple of years. But Greg Youngkin's the new governor. He's a Republican. And this is why I think that, John, that the military may be they've amassed at the border of Virginia, by which I mean Fort Bragg in North Carolina. They've amassed at the border. There's 54,000 active duty troops there. I think because the Republican governor is in office, they want to invade. Are you worried personally about Virginia being invaded by the U.S. government? Because the U.S. government's fought Virginia before, by the way. You know that.
Yes. No, so I haven't seen that story, so I wouldn't say I'm worried about that. I was more referring to, it's kind of nice having a Republican governor, having a guy who ran on defending parents and fighting for parents and actually governing that way. And I just know, being from my original domicile, Illinois, we had a similar situation like this where you might remember, elected Bruce Rauner. He was a Republican, and we all thought, okay, all right, we got a Republican governor, and then he was just terrible, just a total lib. So, no, it's really nice. The Youngkin stuff, we're kind of excited about what's happening.
Now, by the way, John, what part of Illinois are you from?
I'm from a small town called Aledo, so about 4,000 people by the Quad Cities.
Okay. Does that include Moline? Is that one of the Quad Cities, or do I forget that wrong?
You're absolutely right. It's right there by the Mississippi River, so like maybe 45 minutes south of Moline. Yep.
Okay, because my future ex-wife's from Peoria, it's the heart of Illinois. So
yeah,
I spent a little bit of time there. And so and Chicago, of course, I've been to a number of times covering big protests. But part of what brought Youngkin in, I would say, is, and do you agree with me that part of why he got elected is that the Democrats have gotten frickin' crazy? I don't want to get too technical, but frickin' crazy, I think, is accurate. What do you think?
Oh, 100%. I think people are starting to realize, when it was Biden versus Trump, I really do believe this. The people who voted for Biden, it was about a return to normalcy, and they thought that voting for him would, he was just, Uncle Joe, right? And then now all these communists are in charge, and I don't think they really realized what they were voting for. And so you're seeing a lot of buyer's remorse. And I think here in Virginia, I live in Loudoun County. Loudoun County went for Biden by overwhelming margins, and Youngkin actually came close to winning it. I mean, this is like a blue suburban area. So I think that's impressive, and it certainly sets the stage for, Republicans headed into 2022. And I think the important thing is Youngkin is showing the Republican base, hey, I'm actually going to govern like I ran. And I think that's important for House and Senate Republicans to pay attention to that, because, that's what people expect. They don't want to see, the same old Republican Party that, promised they were going to repeal Obamacare and then failed 27 times,
Well, and would you agree with me? Because Youngkin seems to me, the reason I brought up crazy Democrats is because it seems to me like in a normal year, Youngkin is a moderate Republican. But being a moderate Republican right now puts you on the extreme side of the Democrats because they're so nuts, right? Would you agree with me, first off, that he's not a bomb thrower Tea Party guy? Right?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, he's kind of his history has been that of a business Republican, but I think he does understand the circumstances at play here, and he's very much paying attention to what the left's been doing. I think the school board fights. I think he saw that most Republicans would look at that and say, hey, I got to stay away from this. I should just talk about taxes and job growth. And he leaned into it and said, no, this is going to be, if I'm going to win in a blue state like Virginia, I got to lean into this stuff. And he did. And so that's where, we were just so, obviously my organization, APP, was involved in that race. Our super PAC was, we were very excited about it. And, I think it's an important win for the American people.
And I agree with you, but I want you to expand on that point a little bit. Why? And I'll give my theory, and it's the same theory I've already explained, so it's easy, which is I think the Democrats have learned nothing, and they are still acting crazy, and that their attacks are blunted through repetition. What I mean by that is they now just, the average Democratic politician or media person, literally, if you remember the 3 a.m. phone call for Hillary, if you woke the average Democratic messaging official up at 3 a.m. out of a sound sleep, they'd wake up and they'd say, racist. That's the first thing that would happen, right?
Yep.
So by playing the race card, the racist card, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and I could do a few more overs, it doesn't work anymore, because a lot of people go, and these are people, the average Republican I know doesn't like racist, right? If they heard somebody say something racist, they'd be offended by it, and wouldn't want to hang out with that person. Is that your experience, John?
Oh, 100%. Yep.
But when they hear people get called racist over and over and over and over again, endlessly, I think it's blunted. And what they don't seem to realize in these school board things, part of where that issue helped him, I think, Youngkin, in Virginia, is with black voters. Because the idea that black people don't care, like school can do anything, don't care about education, is racist to me. And I don't think the Democrats have learned a damn thing after this loss in Virginia. So do you agree with me, going into the midterms, they're going to get trounced and they deserve it because they didn't, simply because they didn't learn anything. There are lessons to be learned here, and they're not learning them. John, what do you say?
Yeah, so that's kind of my optimistic take, and I kind of agree with you. And my hope is that, it'll take them a few severe losses until they figure it out. But the American people are an optimistic bunch. They believe in their fellow Americans, and this idea, and this, dating back, I remember at the height of the Tea Party, a couple members of Congress, I believe John Lewis was one of them, lying about being called racist epithets. And I remember Andrew Breitbart, promising to offering a reward to someone who would do this. Who would prove it? And they could never do it because, it's obviously a false charge. And this has happened over and over, as you said. And, I just don't think that that's what the American people experience every day. And you saw in Virginia, you mentioned blacks clearly came out for Youngkin more, but also Hispanics. And we don't have like an exact number, but it sure looks like it was about 50-50. And, if Republicans are in that type of position where they're doing that well with Hispanics who want to reject woke communism, where you're starting to see, the effect we've had with Cubans in Florida, but it's happening across all Hispanics across the country, then states like Arizona, heck, even like a state like New Mexico could potentially be in play, and that changes things. So from a pure political perspective, Republicans have a lot to be optimistic about. But like for me, it's okay. You've been given this gift by the Democrats. They're crazy and they don't know it. So let's take advantage. Let's actually do something for the American people, and kind of like what Reagan was able to do, to usher in that type of pro-America revolution.
No, and thanks for bringing up Andrew. I was watching some footage of Breitbart in an interview right before his death, right around the time his book Righteous Indignation came out. And, again, personally, I miss him every day because I loved him and loved talking to him. But also, his fight was, in a sense, defensive. Andrew used to say all the time, he used to say it to me privately as well, he just said, I don't like bullies. And it comes from his background. He doesn't like bullies. And the Democrats have become bullies. And I think the thing is missing. We're about a month or so away from the 10-year anniversary of losing Andrew Breitbart. 10 years. And that, that's part of why I've been watching some of his old interviews. And we'll be talking more about Andrew as the month goes on, because I want to make sure what he did is he gets credit for what he did. But part of what he did was he was not afraid to address a lot of Republicans. All you had to do was call them racist, and they'd hide under the bed, right? And I think it's not enough simply to say, no, we're not racist. I think it's important to point out the racists have D's after their names. That's what these policies. We talked about crime in New York yesterday with Michelle Eskenazi, the bail queen in New York. And these Soros crime policies, I'll put it like this. The people they've affected have been black and brown people, as the phrase goes. In other words, the victims of these shootings in Chicago and Baltimore and Philly that we see every freaking weekend are largely, again, to use the phrase, black and brown people. So they're not helping these policies by the Soros Democrat media complex aren't helping the people who they're claiming to be speaking in favor of. And what's happening is, and you point out that Youngkin got a higher percentage of black vote than they were counting on, and the Hispanic vote was close to 50-50. That's because people at the end of the day, I'll put it like this, you can use some people some of the time, but you can't use all the people all the time. And at a certain point, that's all that's happening, is they're being used by people. And it was a combination, I think, of higher minority vote and higher suburban women vote. In a lot of cases, the soccer mom, suburban white women vote, right? Who you can't just use those people. We know you guys are anti-racist and pro-feminist because you have a D after your name. But you know what? It wasn't working anymore. How important do you think that soccer mom vote was, John, when you look at things?
Oh, it's critical. And you know, I think what's been debated by Republicans and strategists for a long time is how to appeal to that vote. And obviously that goes back decades. That goes back before I was even involved in politics. But, you know, look, we believe at APP, and I think people are starting to realize this, there are cultural issues that you can appeal to those folks on because they really are worried about the future of this country and what it looks like. And they don't want to live in a mean country, a mean-spirited country where, you know, people are judging folks by the color of their skin and not the content of their character. And so, you know, this is where I just thought Youngkin and you know, obviously living here in Virginia, I'm biased to it. I know the national media probably gives Virginia way too much coverage compared to the rest of the country. But, like, it was phenomenal seeing Parents for Youngkin signs in Democrat neighborhoods. And just, it was like a movement. And I think people understood, like, this is what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the future of the country. And in that way, I'm really excited about this because it reminds me of the Tea Party movement. And it's different. The issues are a little bit different. It's more cultural, I think, than fiscal, although the fiscal issues are just as important. But you know, that's why I think Republicans have a lot of reason to be optimistic. They just gotta go, you know, leave it all on the court, right? Like, I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to. They can't assume we're just going to win because the Democrats are crazy.
Well, now I want to talk about the Journalism Competition, what is it, Protection and Preservation Act. I know there's a P in there. Preservation, yeah. So you see, but it is kind of, if it was protection, that wouldn't be crazy of me to think, because it would fit within the sentence as well, and also begins with a P. But John, let me do this. Since you mentioned your group, let's do the plug early so we're not trying to cram it in at the end. Tell people about your group and where they can find out more information.
So we are American Principles Project. We're trying to become the NRA for the family. We have a C3, a C4, and a super PAC, so we're engaged in these campaigns and elections. And you can find us at AmericanPrinciplesProject.org.
Okay, great. Thanks. And so let's talk about the Journalism Competition Preservation Act. Explain what that is. What are you trying to preserve exactly?
So I think, you know, if you look around at the state of local media, conservative media to some degree, although I think a lot of conservative media outlets are still doing pretty well, they've been dying. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But a big one that is no small thing is Google and Facebook have, you know, basically found a way to kind of, I would say, pirate their content and, you know, reduce clicks to their site, take a portion. And so it's really been unfair to a lot of these smaller publishers. And I think in some cases, you know, it's actually putting them out of business. And so what this is trying to do, it's a pretty simple bill. It goes after Google and Facebook specifically, and it would allow the small publishers, conservative media, et cetera, to band together and collectively bargain against Google and Facebook to make sure that they're not getting a raw deal on ads and on content and all that. And there's lots of protections in place to make sure that the big media players like the New York Times aren't screwing the little ones. I mean, there's some important stuff in there that I think a lot of people have been right to address and want to make sure is in there. But it's a very strong bill, and we, you know, our approach at APP has been all of the above. What can we do to take on big tech and weaken their power? And we think this bill would do that.
Now, you'd think Democrats would love this because you said the magic words collective bargaining, which harkens up images of unions, who, of course, by the way, it's in the headlines. union membership's at an all-time low, but the unions for a long time were how Democrats got elected. And they would talk about supporting the working people and so on. They've kind of given up on that. But are Democrats embracing this collective bargaining? Lee asked, knowing the answer. Go ahead.
There's some that are comfortable with the bill. There's a lot that are opposed to it. Look, antitrust is a really peculiar animal out here in D.C. because there's so much big tech funding that goes to both parties. And so this is a weird issue on this and on some other antitrust bills where, I might be in a temporary coalition with some Democrats and I might have Republicans who are militantly opposed to what we're doing. And that's because, really, this is kind of populist. I think when you're talking about antitrust and going after the concentrated power of these largest corporations, that's not something that the Uniparty likes to get on board.
Well, and so I know from libertarians, the libertarian movement because I was working for Ed Clark as a volunteer in '79. So I know the Libertarian Party going way back. And antitrust was always an issue the libertarians were dead set against. Any antitrust laws, they were against. And I noticed in the past few years, though, even people who were principal libertarians were starting to see the problems with the high-tech companies. We're starting to see that they had so much power, they were able to abuse it. And in the case, let me talk about Google for a second. One of the ways they can abuse it, for instance, is because they control search. If you go to your browser, which could be made by Google if you use Google Chrome, or you're on your phone if it's an Android and the operating system made by Google. Let's say you're trying to find a flower shop in the local area. So you type in flower shop, right, in a search engine. Well, Google controls what you see. And that means that rather than send you to, as you say, a local news source or even a local shop, let's say, they may just send you to Amazon or whoever they decide. But by controlling search, for instance, they control it's almost like if the road could reconfigure itself so it doesn't take you by certain stores, it makes it really hard for you to get to them. And this is one of the ways that these high-tech companies have gamed the system. Does this make any sense, John? Is what I'm saying resonate with you at all?
I think that's really well put. I mean, Google has the power to really change the way Americans think about issues. And I think we've seen that with elections. And so, when you look at an election like we had in 2020, Trump lost in 3 states by a total of 44,000 votes. And, there's plenty of documented instances of Google changing their search results. The Wall Street Journal has cataloged this. I mean, it's well known that they were biased towards Democrats. That's going to change an election. I mean, especially with that kind of margin. And so I think that's where, libertarians, especially the folks I like to call folk libertarians who maybe are a little bit distant from D.C., so they're not getting that sweet big tech money. I think they understand that concentrated power anywhere is a threat to liberty everywhere. And we got to be, worried about that. And so that's kind of our approach on this. It's, I'm not really interested in antitrust, on like various random industries. I think it's interesting, but that's not really what motivates us. We're mostly concerned about these large communications medium, and what the power that Google and Facebook and even something like Twitter has on our elections and on the discourse.
Well, here's an example. I'm talking about the search engines, for instance. In a lot of cases, if you type in someone's name, so let's say someone and I'm not sure, I'm not complaining about anything that's going on with me because I don't know, I don't search myself, so I don't know what's going on. I probably should. But I know that in a lot of cases, that if you type in a name, like you typed in Lee Stranahan, it should go, the first result, as far as I'm concerned, should be my website. Because if someone's interested in me, right? It should send them to my site. But in a lot of cases, it doesn't. It sends them to 5 other things. And in a lot of cases, they may be negative sites, right? And that's mental. The fact is, if you're doing search that's supposed to help people, right? And you know where I've noticed this, because I'm planning long-term vacations and stuff. Sometimes I'll look for a hotel, and I know what I'm looking for, and I'll be very specific. And I don't get that hotel. I get that hotel's competitors. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But it doesn't really make sense. And they've done studies on this thing, and I'm sure you know about it. It should be that people keep going. But the fact is, the top 3 search results in any category get most of the clicks. People shouldn't be too lazy to scroll down a little bit or to go to page 2 or 3. But in fact, human beings are that lazy. And so what happens is, if you're in the top 3 search results, you get most of the clicks. And a lot of times people don't go anywhere else. And it's horrible. But that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. And I'll tell you, up here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where I am, the local paper, which, by the way, is local, there were more local papers, and they're completely gone. The one that's still publishing is the Argus Leader, which is a Gannett newspaper. So it's owned by the same company that owns USA Today. But that local paper is like, my kids turn in papers and, you know, in middle school that are longer than the local newspaper. The paper edition, I'm not joking, it's like 4 pages or something. And part of it, going back to Google, is because Google also controls advertising, right? And your local paper used to make its money from advertising. But this is one of the big advantages Google specifically has, and Facebook, is they not only control search, and as you say, there's nothing keeping them, there's no copyright laws for information, which means if the local paper puts out, you know, there was a traffic accident, there's nothing keeping me from grabbing that info. Hey, there was a traffic accident, and putting it up on my site, and then you're bypassing the people that reported it. All I did was copy and paste what somebody else wrote. But isn't the fact that they control advertising another dangerous part of this media complex that the high-tech companies have, John?
Yeah, absolutely. When you put advertising and search together, you know, it's a common sense business decision for Google to decide to preference the folks that advertise with them, and I'm sure that's what you see all the time with you know, local news. But you also have situations, and this is a crazy example. You know, you were mentioning how they preference or don't preference. Sometimes they actually totally omit. And so, you know, if you look, and this has been happening for a couple of years now, but if you went to Breitbart.com right now and looked at the top headline and copy-pasted the headline and entered it into Google without saying the word Breitbart, it will come up no results. You can put quotes on it. It will come up no results. They've completely blacklisted Breitbart unless you write Breitbart, right? Then it'll come up because they know, you know, they don't want to reveal what they're doing. And they've done this for a lot of news outlets, Western Journal, you know, all sorts of these different outlets. And this is all about their combating fake news and misinformation. But this is what we're talking about. This is too much power, all right? Like we've decided as a country, we believe freedom of speech is so important we should have a protection in our founding document for it. But now we've kind of outsourced all the bad things to the private actors, and we just let them do it, you know?
Hey, John, we're out of time. Fantastic appearance, as always. Thanks, John Schweppe, for joining us from American Principles Project. We got more coming up. Jason Goodman is co-hosting with us in the next hour, and we'll be talking to Andrew Lawton about what he saw up in Canada. All that and more coming up on The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back. It is time for the final hour today of the two we got of the best damn radio show in the world. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. Thanks again to John Schreppe for joining us. Great appearance by John, as usual. That's great. And I appreciate him bringing up Andrew Breitbart, because I have been thinking about Andrew a lot. 10 years Andrew's been gone, Rod. Think about that. It's a little weird, isn't it?
Yeah, and his staying power shows, because a lot of people bring him up on this show and other shows, and it shows that he had a prominent effect on people.
He did, and I don't think he gets enough credit for the effect that he had. And in a lot of ways that are positive, not that anyone, if they brought it up, they'd blame him for a lot of stuff. But I don't think, and I really mean this, I don't think you would have had Donald Trump without Andrew, in a sense. And I mean the good stuff of Donald Trump, not the bad stuff of Donald Trump, of which there was plenty. And I said this on Twitter yesterday, and some people don't like it. The reality is Trump was a letdown, and we can do better. That would be my slogan. Trump, we can do better. And I don't mean better among Democrats. That's not better. But you see what I'm saying? That I think that, have you seen any, let me ask you this, Rod. Have you seen any indication that Donald Trump learned a damn thing from his first term? Seriously.
No, I would say he's even more centered in himself, that he thinks he did a great job. I mean, he even said that he drained the swamp. I don't know what drainage company he hired, but it didn't. they didn't do the job.
He not only didn't get the swamp drained, he had Mike Pompeo's big old butt sticking out of the pipe. I'm just saying, there's no drainage going on when you got Mike Pompeo's buttocks involved. But Jason Goodman's joining us as guest host. Jason, are you there?
I am here. Hello, gentlemen.
Hey, Jason. I'm sorry you had to hear that about Mike Pompeo's butt. I did not mean to.
I like that conversation, Lee, and I agree with you. I mean, look, I voted for Donald Trump. I've said this on our show, High Dive with Lee Stranahan on Patreon and Subscribestar, but I don't know if I've said it on here. I feel very much about Donald Trump the way I feel about my ex-wife. I could think about when we were married and everything was great and how beautiful she was and everything. But in the end, it didn't work out. And going back to that is regressing. We need to move forward. The other problem I have most recently with our former president is that he's promoting Mike Lindell. And people have mistaken my criticism of Mike Lindell for some kind of personal vendetta against Mike Lindell, which is totally wrong. I actually had a very positive impression of Mike Lindell prior to a phone call that we had, and I don't care how he treated me. It was that I was calling him to tell him that evidence that he was promulgating all over the place was factually incorrect. And I told him that because I wanted to help him to strengthen his case and to prevent him from going into court with evidence that I knew was terrible and a witness that I knew was terrible, that was like placing a poison pill in there. And I believe Mike Lindell did that intentionally. And I believe Mike Lindell is staying relevant by showering people like Steve Bannon and Jack Posobiec with money, and Alex Jones, and maybe even Donald Trump, his campaign. But Patrick Byrne and Mike Lindell are two people that I think true conservatives need to watch out for. I don't trust those guys, and I think they're up to no good.
Well, we'll talk about that. I want to talk about propaganda. Some thoughts I've been talking about propaganda a little bit, and how the U.S. propaganda works and how sophisticated it is. And it's not that sophisticated. One of the ways it works is that money talks.
Yeah.
But let's get to him. Tarif, I see you. Let's get to, we got to do the boom. Jason, take it away. Say the name of the show and watch what happens.
You are listening to The Backstory with Lee Stranahan.
See, here's the hint. Don't say anything after the name of the show. Just say the name of the show.
Sorry.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got it.
Because as soon as Saul hears the name of the show,
he hits
anything else is he hits it. Boom.
I'm still training.
That's why No, that's right. On the job, free trading.
Yeah.
Since you're a volunteer. I mentioned it was funny yesterday. We had Carmine Mondays, Carmine Sabia, and Michelle Eskenazi, the bail queen in New York, was on. And she was talking about people like to get paid for their work. But, of course, Carmine's not paid to be on here as a co-host. None of the co-hosts are getting paid.
Well, but it's good promotion, though.
Well, hopefully. And hopefully it's fun. I try to make it fun for the co-hosts as well.
And
you know what I'm saying? And
yeah,
and interesting. And it's only one day a week. It's sort of like the Big Brothers, Big Sisters program. Just put in one day being my big brother or big sister here.
Yes.
Depending on how you identify gender-wise. But so let's get to Tarif first, and then I want to talk about propaganda a little bit. Because I have some thoughts, and I'd love to get your perspective on it, Jason. 202-521-1320. Tarif, what's on your mind?
How you doing? How you doing, gentlemen? Thanks for taking my call. First, I'd like to say free drone science, free dinosaur, and hashtag no more. Okay, this is about what's going on with the meetings Putin have with he had a meeting with Viktor Orban from Hungary, and it went so good that they signed up a gas deal that's going to last all the way to 2036. Was going to be 5 times. The gas will be 5 times cheaper than the market price of the EU gas. You know, and Alex McCurry was talking about some ambassadors, some UN diplomats was saying that the U.S. needs to basically back off their criticizing of Russia with Ukraine. Not one country, not Kenya, Gabon, Mexico, criticized Russia, but they're always saying that the U.S. need to work with Russia and the British need to work with Russia. Macron was on the phone today with Putin, and they're discussing different security topics. Johnson called in and was scheduled to meet Putin today, but it fell through. They had to reschedule. So Draghi from Italy, he spoke with Putin today. So the rumor is that Draghi and Macron is working on deals with Putin, you know. So there you go.
Well, I'd agree with that. That's why it's being reported. But let me point out, there's nothing to deal with. The U.S. is lying about Russia, period. The U.S. is lying. They've been lying since November. I'm not mad at you or anything, Tarif. I'm just being dramatic for the purposes of radio. But I do feel strongly about this. There's nothing to work with. If I say, I'll put it like this. If I called Saul and I said, hey, Jason's going to drive down from New York and punch you in the face. Jason, are you going to do that?
No, definitely not, Saul. You got nothing to worry about.
Okay, but if I said that, and then I said, but hey, Saul, I'm going to negotiate with Jason, not on the air, right?
Exactly.
But I'll talk to Jason for you. And then that night, Jason, you don't come down and punch Saul because you never planned to.
Yeah.
Then I can say, see, Saul, he didn't punch you because I was negotiating with him.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I'm adamant about this point. Russia is not and was never going to invade Ukraine. They have no reason to invade Ukraine. In fact, I see people lying who should know better. I won't even say lying. That's a little incendiary, and it might not be accurate. But they're saying, well, Russia invaded Ukraine before in 2014. No, they didn't. Russia was in Crimea. There was no invasion. No one came in. There were no casualties. Usually when you got an invasion, you got some people saying, hey, stop. And there's fighting. There was no fighting. There was a referendum in Crimea. Russia was already there. They had the naval base in Sebastopol. And that stayed there. There was no invasion. So I'm just adamant on this point. Russia is not and never was invading. And any implication that, like, well, they were, even the implication, and I understand your point, Sharif, and great call as usual, but even the implication that Macron and Italy are negotiating with Russia, they're not negotiating with them over what the U.S. Now, that Putin-Orban press conference today, did you see anything about that, Jason?
I did not, unfortunately.
So words matter. And I'm going to point out what Putin said.
Yeah.
Because remember, the Russia submitted what their concerns were to the U.S. And what Putin said today after speaking with Orban, its first comments since December, he said the U.S. ignored our concerns. Now, what he didn't say was the U.S. rejected our concerns. You see the difference between rejected and ignored?
Yes, because rejecting them would imply that they listened to them, considered them, and did not agree to do it. Ignoring them is in line with what you're saying. The United States has a narrative about what they want to have happen there. I mean, if the United States or anybody just started bombing and said, oh, they invaded, a huge majority of people watching MSNBC and CNN and reading the New York Times and the Washington Post would say, oh, you see that? Russia started a war, so we went and fought them. But it could be the United States starting it. And in fact, it looks like that may be what is happening.
And we had Zelensky, and this will segue us into propaganda, because I want to talk about how the U.S. propaganda machine works, because people need to understand it. It's a consensus machine, to use a term Noam Chomsky's used in the past. And I thought Noam Chomsky's work talking about the media is worth listening to. And I don't agree with Chomsky and everything, obviously, but his stuff on the media is very good. And he talks about how one of the things Chomsky said was that the New York Times sets the editorial page for the world. And he's right. And this has to do with the concept of consensus. And I've said this recently on one of the shows I was on. Think about what we know about Russian propaganda, right? When you think of Russian propaganda, like during the 50s or whatever, it consisted of like posters, right? You've seen them.
Block letters and red and, contrast the images.
Yes, and I like the graphic design, but that's beside the point. I do, because I do. It's good. They're well-designed posters, but
Stylized.
they're just posters.
Yeah.
While Russia was making posters, remember what the United States was doing for propaganda in the 50s. We weren't just making films like Duck and Cover, although we were doing that, which is the equivalent of posters to me. We were doing that sort of blunt force propaganda. Do this, do that. We were also experimenting with mind control. We were experimenting with acid. We're experimenting, going back to Cecil Rhodes and that school of thought, with Edward Bernays' propaganda. It's closely tied to advertising. Propaganda in the U.S. right now is about establishing consensus. And it's using the same techniques, Jason, I would argue, that advertisers use.
Oh, absolutely.
And you've worked, I'll put it like this. You've worked in film and video, and you've worked with clients who were advertisers, right?
Correct. Yes.
And they, one thing, you probably know this. Anybody who's a film fan, they may not know this. When you have a film that wins, let's say Sundance, the big Sundance Film Festival happens every year in Utah.
Well, online now.
Right, online now. But when that's considered the indie film, place to debut your film.
Yes.
And you think of these indie filmmakers are the independent free spirits. Well, Jason, I think when your film wins at Sundance, who's the first person to hire you? What's the first group of people? Not specific person.
Oh, some studio is going to buy it.
No, it's not. It's the first person to hire you to direct something are the commercial makers. In other words, if your film wins Sundance, the next check you get is probably going to be from an automaker.
Well, giant company for sure.
And
movie studio or something, automaker, TV show, Netflix, something like this.
Because they want their commercials to be edgy.
Right.
Does that make sense? You know what I'm talking about.
I think there's another reason, Lee. I think they want people who have influence. Look at what's happening with Joe Rogan or anybody who has influence that steps outside the line, they get canceled. And what they want to do, I think, is have these things like Sundance. You know, I've been to Sundance many times. I have never entered a film in competition. I've never won anything at Sundance. But just even in attending, the vibe has changed so much from an independent, cool, underground thing to just, you know, every jerk from L.A. descending on this tiny town. And I mean, you know, 15x, you know, when Uber gets that overdrive or whatever they call it. The most insane Uber rates I've ever seen have been in, you know, Park City or, you know, wherever it is in Utah where they have that thing. And I'm just sick of it. I canceled going to that a long time ago, but it's part of the propaganda machine now.
I did have a film rejected by Sundance, and I'm not bitter. But I turned my film Breathing Room, we submitted to Sundance, and they turned us down. But I've only been to one Sundance, and I didn't make it to Park City. I stayed in Salt Lake because I was there for the premiere of Anthony Weiner's film.
Oh, wow.
And you know this. They don't do everything in that small city, Park City. They do some stuff in Salt Lake.
Yeah, different locations around and everything. But I have a question for you, Lee, with regard to the mind control stuff. So I just learned this about 2 weeks ago, and I could not believe I didn't know it. The mind control through LSD that you're talking about is a declassified CIA program called Operation, oh my God, MK Ultra.
MK Ultra, yeah.
Yeah, that was revealed by the director of the CIA, William Colby, during the Church Committee hearings. Did you know that Joe Biden was not only involved in the Church Committee hearings, he was like the direct assistant of Frank Church?
No, that's it. I did not know that. That's very interesting.
It is very interesting. I think it's something that we need to go back and look at.
Well, do you know what? I'm convinced that some of these people, and I'll give a Clinton example in a second, they're initially, they may be on the right side. But once they figure out how the world works and where the money is, I'll just put it like this. The money ain't on the right side.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So someone like Biden may have been working with Church and was concerned about the CIA. But once he figured out, and here's the Clinton example. Bill Clinton, and you can go back and look at his 92 when he was nominated, when he got the nomination. One of the people he thanked was one of his college professors, Carol Quigley. Carol Quigley wrote the book Tragedy and Hope, which explained the Milner's Kindergarten, Cecil Rhodes connections, Anglo-Americanism. Carol Quigley's book exposed the way the world works. And I'm convinced that Bill Clinton looked at that and said, oh, okay, I get it. As opposed to, okay, I'm going to go out and expose what they're doing.
Right.
He figured out, you know what? That's the way the world works, so I'm going to cash in. Is that coherent?
It is, and I think there's two types of people. Well, multiple types, but let's talk about two. There's the one that you've just described, the opportunists who figure, you know what? Can't beat them, join them, or they don't even bother thinking about beating them. They just want to be on the side of the money. And then I think there are people who, you know, you're more generous with Joe Biden than I am. I don't presume that he was in there for the right reasons. I presume, from what I've been learning since I discovered that the only person in that committee who was dedicated to exposing the CIA was Frank Church, and everybody else was there to trick people. But I think there's another way that you get involved in this, where an honest person engages in activity that they understand to be legitimate, like running for Congress. And then when you win, someone comes to you and says, oh, hey, by the way, you know that $4 million that you raised through this, campaign or whatever? This aspect of it, that aspect of it, and this other aspect of it were totally illegal. And don't worry, no one's going to look into this unless we tell them to. And now you're locked into a track where you're doing whatever these people tell you to do.
Well, and I'm going to point out, I'll use a personal example, but I'm not bragging. I'm the opposite. I may be stupid. I think I'm stupid.
I don't think that you're stupid, no.
No, I'm pretty sure I'm stupid.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Because when I was working on the Pigford story with Andrew Breitbart, which exposed the fraud in the Pigford Black Farmers Program payments, I figured out that thing. And at the time, the Obama Justice Department under Eric Holder, they did a women's farmer settlement. And all you had to do was claim you'd attempted to farm and had a vagina, because you need to be a woman.
Right.
Right? And I think I can say that word if I'm very medically clinical, and it's not sexual at all, right? It's all, am I safe there? I'm not going to keep saying it, but was I safe?
Yeah, you're safe.
Okay, thank goodness. Otherwise, I'd just say had a Virginia. And we just go with that. People can figure it out. But if you were if you were a woman, you could get a $50,000 check if you filled out the right paperwork and said you attempted to farm. Not only that, you could file for other people. And I'm driving down the road with my wife and our kids, covering this story, making almost nothing. I was paid very little working with Breitbart, almost nothing. In fact, our car was repoed at the end of that.
Ooh.
That's how little we were making. This is why I say I'm probably stupid. And I looked to my wife, and I said, you know what? You're a woman. If we filled out the paperwork right, we could get 50 grand for you. Furthermore, your mom's a woman. We could fill it out for her. Remember when your mom attempted to farm, Lauren? And she said, oh, yeah, of course I do. And I said, and remember your late grandmother? She also attempted to farm, right? And this is what the scam was.
Wow.
And I went out and I did a broadcast about, and I pretended to tell people how to make money in this farmer settlement. Everything I said was stuff I'd learned doing journalism. And I said, and somebody was listening to me, and they filled out the paperwork.
Ooh.
And they wrote to me 6 months later, and they said, Lee, I got to thank you. I just got a check for 50 grand.
Wow. Holy cow. And they're not a farmer.
No, they never farmed. All they did was filled out the paper the way I was telling him other people were doing. So this is what I'm saying. I'm stupid. My wife and I could have easily made 250 grand.
Come on.
Easily.
That kind of thing is going to catch up with you. First of all, you're not stupid. You did the right thing. That person who stole the 50, unless you're doing it to prove that that can be done and then return it to the government and make a story out of it, they're stealing money.
But nobody ever got in trouble for stealing money. And but what my wife said at the time was, she said, we'd be the ones to get busted.
Right.
She said, now, but by the way, that's not an ethical argument, it's a practical one.
Yeah, exactly.
In other words, she was not saying we shouldn't do this on principle. Because, and by the way, I'm not saying she was even wrong. I understand it. You know this, you've been married. Women in some senses are more practical than men.
Some.
In some senses.
Yeah.
They just go,
stop playing that video game and get a job.
Right. Yes, exactly. And she kind of felt like, why? Because I'd given up a good job at Access Hollywood.
Right.
To go do journalism.
Yeah, they hate that.
I went from 100 grand a year to like under 30K a year.
Yeah, that's not too female friendly.
Right. And I get that. But on the other hand, I felt like I was doing the right thing. The right thing, and $5 will buy you Not even, it'll buy you a small Starbucks drip. Not even a latte, probably.
Let's address that for a second, Lee, because, you look back on things in life, you can second guess yourself. If I did this, that, the other, you don't know. If you had stayed at that job at Access Hollywood, I bet you they got a lot less people working in that office right now. And when you talk about the kind of jobs that you and I do, as you and I become 50 and then 60, Access Hollywood is looking at that $100,000 and thinking, isn't there somebody from, California School of Design that we can hire for $50,000 to get Lee out of here? Or we're consolidating the office and we're remote working, so we're going to hire people in India or whatever.
Well,
maybe
that's actually part of why I left. Because when I started Access, I was making $130K a year. And then the financial crisis hit in 2007, 2008. And NBC across the board cut everyone's overtime.
Wow.
So I lost in overtime about $30K because I could see it. That's one of those things where you don't notice it week to week when you get your check.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
But then at the end of the year, you go, whoa, wait a second.
Yeah.
I lost a lot of money there because it's only a few $100 out of each check. But that money...
you start to notice it, whereas like when that money's there, you're like, yeah, let's go out to dinner tonight. And when it's not, you're kind of like, man, no, you don't notice it explicitly, but you start to feel it here and there.
Well, I know, right. But you know what I'm saying. But
it
didn't dawn on me.
Right.
Where I was noticing it week to week was, like you say, having trouble just paying the bills month to month became tougher. But do you know what I did? I thought it was because I was a loser. I just figured I don't manage my money well, and therefore it's my fault. So I sort of personally took the blame as opposed to going, wait a second, when they cut everyone's overtime, which they did, it wasn't personal. They did it to everybody. And I could see the writing on the wall at that point.
Yeah.
So that's part of why I left. On the other hand, I was still making more than I got paid when I went over to Breitbart. I never got paid when Andrew was alive decently. And part of why is, again, that ethical thing. He was having financial problems himself. And I didn't want to, I was trying to help the guy out. So I took less money than I needed.
Yeah, you were in a startup there. I mean, again, I don't think you should criticize yourself for this, Lee, because as I said, if you had just played it safe and stayed with the, company job at NBC, you might be totally fired right now and be way behind the eight ball as far as starting your second career in journalism versus where you are now. Well established. You've got a job with Sputnik. You've got an audience that follows you. You've got, High Dive on Patreon. And I don't think you should second guess this decision at all.
And let me tell people about that real quickly. On High Dive, if you go to patreon.com/Stranahan, right now, if you sign up as a $10 a month subscriber, you'll get some of the scripts and art I've been working on for these fiction projects I'm developing based on my journalism. Go check that out, patreon.com/Stranahan. See, I got to, Daddy got to buy a new pair of shoes. Yeah. I got to do the plug sometimes, Jason. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
And Citizen Journalism School, which we're about to relaunch. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to have an app for Citizen Journalism School that you can be part of. Go over to citizenjournalismschool.com. Oh, and by the way, speaking of plugs, we love having Carrie Smith and Carter Laren from Unsafe Space here. They're the co-hosts on Wednesday. We'll all be on the show with them on Friday, I believe it is. So there we go. Staying busy. I mentioned I was on Alex Jones' show yesterday. That was fun. Coming up after this, Jason, someone who was up in Canada at the trucker rally. Andrew Lawton will be joining us, and we'll see if Justin Trudeau's lying. Do you have a guess offhand?
If his mouth is moving, I think the answer is yes.
There we go. Jason Goodman from Crowdsource the Truth. Follow Jason, support Jason as well. You're listening to Lee Stranahan and Jason Goodman on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook. or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want them recorded.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back live for the second hour, last half hour of today's show on The Backstory, joined by our special guest host, Jason Goodman, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. Joining us now is a first-time guest. We're very happy to have him with us. Andrew Lawton, thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Lee. Thanks very much for having me.
Well, we appreciate it. Tell people about your show. Tell people about the Andrew Lawton Show.
It is a show that generally looks at Canadian politics. Every now and then I try to weave in things that are happening around the world. I've always approached things from an ideologically conservative perspective, so I'm not partisan by any stretch. But in the last couple of years, it's increasingly been a show about the government's encroachments on liberty in Canada and around the world, as we see the pandemic and how it's been used basically to trample on individual freedom. So it's become a bit niche, but as we've seen in the Canadian news in the last couple of weeks, it's become the hotbed of, I think, a very significant global fight now.
Well, let me just also do an inside baseball. If I'm going to do inside baseball, I guess it'll be the Blue Jays. But an inside baseball and Canadian politics thing that you're talking about, the head of the Conservatives is in some trouble right now. It might get tossed out. And it seems this guy, Aaron, what's his name? You know what I'm talking about.
Aaron O'Toole, yeah. Yeah, this is where Canadian politics gets kind of wacky, because we are a lot more similar to the British system than we are to yours. So he is the leader of the Conservative Party. He ran in our election last September and lost, but he stays on in a role that's called the opposition leader. So his job is basically to hold the government to account, to hold Justin Trudeau to account. But he hasn't really been doing all that much opposing or leading. So there's been a bit of a revolt in his caucus, and they're going to be voting tomorrow, it sounds like, on whether they turf him as leader. So, yeah, it is a bit of an interesting and exciting time in Canadian politics just for that alone, take out everything else that's happening.
Well, and I think it goes right to what you said, which is why I brought it up, even though I don't remember his whole name. But because generally speaking,
he does most times. So you're not alone there, Lee.
Right. So I, like many people, don't know Aaron O'Toole from Gordon Lightfoot usually, but it seems like the criticism being lodged against him, we get in the U.S., he would be the equivalent. Is Aaron O'Toole the equivalent of what we call in the U.S. a rhino? Is he thought of that way?
Yeah, he is similar to that. One of the big challenges, though, is that when he was running for the leadership, he positioned himself as being the rock-ribbed, true blue. Blue is the conservative color here. The rock-ribbed, true blue conservative, and then just completely reversed on that once he won. So he was always more moderate, but it was the positioning of himself as being the fire-breathing conservative and then just rolling on that really alienated a lot of his supporters.
Now, one of the reasons, and I'm so glad you could join us again, thank you, is that I love it when people know stuff firsthand, not just because they've read stuff. And I saw you up there at the truckers rally, the Freedom Convoy rally in Ottawa, right? You were there this past weekend, correct?
Yeah, I was there waiting for the trucks to arrive and covering everything that was going on afterwards.
Now, did any of the burning crosses burn you? Did you get hurt at all, smoked out by all the racists? By the way, it's hard to tell people up in Ottawa if they're in their Klan outfit because it's winter. And so the white sheets tend to fit in with the snow, don't they? A little hard to spot sometimes, so you might get burned.
Yeah.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah, you can't tell the anarchists either because everyone's just covering their face to get out of the cold. It was odd because it's like a lot of the people who were protesting are very anti-masks, but it was also the equivalent of, I think, like -5 degrees Fahrenheit there. So, but it's like on principle, they don't want to put on a balaclava and then be mistaken for being pro-mask. So everyone was just freezing. But it makes it all the more impressive, the turnout, that everyone was there in the frigid Canadian cold. And it was pretty much all outdoors. Every now and then you pop into the hotel or people were going inside their trucks to warm up. But, no, it was quite a sight.
Well, no, and I want to talk about the way Nova Scotia reacted to it as well. But this rally, I'm making the jokes about the Klan and everything because, of course, Justin Trudeau, your fearless leader up in Canada there, has come out and very explicitly said this is a racist event. And also that the truckers apparently, according to Trudeau, hate veterans, that they were demolishing veterans' monuments. So let me just ask you bluntly, what the hell is Justin Trudeau talking about?
So this is the thing, and you know this very well because of all of the issues we've seen with Black Lives Matter rallies and other American rallies that in many cases turn to riots, where you get large enough groups of people together and you get a few examples, or in some cases a lot more than a few examples, of behavior that is reprehensible. Now, in this particular case, here's what I've scoured for footage of this. I did not see one single swastika in my time walking around. I did not see one single Confederate flag. I did not see one single racist piece of signage or anything. But I did on Twitter later on. Now, I'm not denying it happened. I saw one person that was photographed with a swastika away from the crowd. The photograph was taken about a block or 2 blocks away from where most of the people were assembled. No idea if it was a Nazi sympathizer or someone that was trying to delegitimize the whole movement. No idea, but it was just one. And there was someone with a Confederate flag as well. And again, everyone else in the crowd around them said, listen, we don't want you here. We don't need that. Get lost. So there was nothing there. But if you talk to Justin Trudeau, if you turn on Canadian mainstream media, this was like, you're right, a big old Klan rally. We had cross burnings. We had people that were all decked out in white sheets. It was insane at just how brazenly dishonest the characterization of this rally of people just really having a good time in Ottawa was.
No, and as you say, on a very cold day. And by the way, let me name another Canadian who I've seen associated with Confederate flags. That would be Robbie Robertson from the band The Band. If anyone watches the film Last Waltz, you'll see there's these shots where the band is being interviewed, and behind them is a Confederate flag. And the reason they had it, I guarantee you, and by the way, when the film The Last Waltz came out, nobody said anything about it because they knew what was going on. It represented rebellion. It was not, people didn't take it to be racism, they took it to be rebellion. And it's only sort of in the new modern Black Lives Matter context that I'll put it like this, the show The Dukes of Hazzard.
Right.
Great American TV show. You remember that, Jason?
You can't show it anymore. Yeah.
had a big old Confederate flag, and that was not a racist show.
Correct.
And
well,
no one even thought of it that way.
in it, though. There weren't any black people, but they never did anything that specifically dealt with race. They were just driving around getting chased by the cops.
Right, by Boss Hogg. It was not even a pro-police show because because the police were not portrayed real well in that.
Now, I have a serious question for Andrew, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I first heard about Aaron O'Toole when the real focus was on the dust-up at the National Microbiology Lab. He had somehow intervened in some kind of lawsuit to reveal the documents or hide the documents or whatever. But this is one of the biggest failings of the Canadian government, in my view. And it's relevant to the Trump convoy because this Dr. Chu, who was escorted by the RCMP out of Canada's only level 4 biohazard, microbiology lab, this Chinese scientist had been to Wuhan, and her and 2 of her students were escorted out by the RCMP. This is July 2019, and we still know none of the details surrounding the scientist, her ejection from the lab. She's been fired. What do we know about that? What's O'Toole's role in all that?
Now that there's some inside baseball Canadian content. I must admit, I am very, very impressed because I think a lot of Canadians were paying close attention to that. So you get the fully loaded vat of maple syrup, but the huge story. So the Canadian government right now, the Trudeau government has always had a significant blind spot for China. It's actually not just embarrassing, it's downright dangerous. At one point, Justin Trudeau, before he was prime minister, was doing an interview, and he said he admired China's dictatorship.
Whoa.
It lets them get things done quickly.
Jeez.
He said when he was asked what country he admired most apart from Canada. And so
wow.
Huge issue here. And yeah, we had this top lab in Canada, which does a lot of work with the U.S., a lot of work outside of the country as well. The top security lab was studying all sorts of deadly diseases. And we had Chinese nationals that were working there who it was determined were leaking things to the Chinese military and had done stuff with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And then they were escorted out of the lab by police, and for months no one was really talking about it. Then they were fired, and the government still to this day has not provided any of the evidence, even when the evidence was basically subpoenaed by a parliamentary oversight committee, which referring to. So the government said we're not handing over this data, even though they are compelled to by Parliament. So yeah, the Conservatives tried to sue, but it hadn't really gone anywhere. Because then we went into an election, and then when we came back, it just everyone seemed to forget about it.
But the specific question is, are we able to tell from O'Toole's actions if he's legitimately trying to get to the bottom of it, or is he just playing opposition? Because whenever I see people doing these interventions into lawsuits, we really start to venture into territory that becomes very complicated for the average person to unravel and understand what their true intention will be. I'm concerned that might be Canadian parliamentary lawfare.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, the word that gets thrown around is controlled opposition, and it's not in the literal sense. He has autonomy. He has agency. The issue is political cowardice. That's the issue. It's being unwilling to take up a lot of issues because you have a liberal government and by and large a media that's happy to turn around criticisms as China of the Chinese regime as being racist against Chinese people, which is not. You have people that are prepared to take up any. Now, and we're talking about a prime minister here who literally cannot tell you how many times he's engaged in blackface. Yet conservatives are the ones that are forced to defend accusations of racism right up until this week for daring to support truckers advocating for freedom.
Wow. And then you know what? One other thing that I think is important to this, because of what you're telling us about Trudeau's, blind spot. Again, I think you're being very generous. I think he's closing his eyes and claiming a blind spot. But we're also approaching 2 years since the first civilian director of intelligence at the RCMP, Dr. Cameron Ortis, was arrested on allegations that he was selling secret Canadian information to adversaries, but he's been denied justice. He's sitting in jail. It's unclear what's going on with his trial, and his PhD thesis was about compromised nodes and cybersecurity in East Asia. So perhaps he knew something about Chinese security or the lack thereof within Canada that has placed him in jail. Do we know anything about what's going on with Dr. Ortis?
No, and to be honest, it's not a case I followed closely. I'm familiar with it, but one thing I would point out is that it hasn't gotten a lot of play in the media here. There were a couple of reports. I think it was back in, was it June of last year, January of last year, when we started to get a bit more information. But since then, it's kind of just gone down the memory hole.
Wow.
Amazing. Now, Andrew, one of the things you did was great. By the way, I would suggest people follow you on Twitter. That's your name, Andrew Lawton, right? That's the way to find you on Twitter, correct?
Yeah, last I checked, yeah.
LAWTON.
Well, sometimes people have different Twitter names than their names, so I just want to make sure that I was. Or sometimes people are real, you know what I'm saying, or something.
Yeah.
But you had some great interviews. Let's play the first one with the pastor, and then you can talk about who this man is and what you think. We have a short clip of one of the interviews that you did. Let's hit that, Saul.
Why are you here in Ottawa for this convoy? I am here because of one word, freedom. And that's why these people are here, and I am here in Ottawa to thank the truckers, to bring us to a brand new level where we couldn't get to, and they have done, and here they are, and they deserve all the honor we can give them.
You've seen in the last 2 years as a Christian minister, your colleagues put in jail, your own church shut down. Did you ever imagine that this country would do all the things that it's been doing to people of faith and people of no faith at all, to basically all Canadians?
I would have never thought this, and like you know, at first they came for the pastors, and then the owners of the businesses, and then the frontline workers, and now they have touched the nerve because here are the truckers, and they're coming for everyone, and if somebody's still not awake, tomorrow they're coming for you. I would have never imagined this, and this honking that you're hearing right now is the call for people. Stand up, this is our chance, here's our opportunity, we must do it.
Now talk about that, Andrew. He actually went to jail. Tell us about that.
No, so he didn't go to jail. That gentleman's name is Pastor Henry Hildebrandt. He runs a very small, very conservative church, actually not far from me in southern Ontario, Canada. And he has been embroiled in legal battles with the state. And actually this week, his constitutional case against the government has had a hearing. But the government at one point in Ontario banned church services from being in person. They basically told every church that they have to shut down. And he decided, okay, I'll play by the rules. We'll have all of our congregation in the parking lot. We'll have a drive-up service. And the police started surveilling him, tracking who was being there. And eventually the government relented and said drive-in services were fine. But the longer the pandemic went on, the longer a lot of people of faith were saying, listen, it's not fair for the government to shut us down. And at a certain point, he just said, we're going to carry on. We answer to God, not the government. And the government eventually had the doors locked on that church, saddled them with millions and millions of dollars in fines. And they were literally locked out of their church for, I think it was a good 3 or 4 months. There have been other pastors in Alberta in particular who went to jail because they wouldn't close down their churches, that were actually arrested, handcuffed, brought to jail, all for the crime of worshiping in a supposedly free country. And again, I mean, it's easy to talk about infringements on freedom, and you don't want to be dramatic, and you don't want to start comparing Western liberal democracies to places like Cuba and North Korea. But when we're talking about jailing pastors, this is a legitimate state persecution. So Pastor Hildebrandt didn't have it as bad as some of his colleagues did, but he was certainly near the top of the enemy's list for his services.
Well, I also want to talk about the shutting down speech, and this was pretty frightening to me. So Nova Scotia, I saw this right before the rally started. And by the way, this sounds like I'm making it up, but I'm not. Because as soon as someone said they had a Canadian girlfriend, it's usually a lie. They never had a girlfriend in their lives.
Yeah.
But I had a girlfriend who was from Newfoundland, and that's where I learned the term Newfie. So I don't know if you're from Nova Scotia, Are you a Novi? I don't know. But Nova Scotia, I believe, is where the Trailer Park Boys are from. Nova Scotia actually banned, they made it illegal, correct, Andrew? You couldn't support the convoy. Think about that. That's really frightening, Jay. Did you see that, Jason?
I did. I don't. How do they do that? Like, how you're not allowed to like thumbs up it on YouTube or whatever?
No,
how do they make it illegal?
They said you're not allowed to stand at the road if you're there to support or cheer on anyone that is seeking to blockade, anyone that's basically connected with this convoy. That was, and incidentally, the convoy wasn't stopping in Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia was not being targeted by the convoy in any way. But they said that you can't stand on an overpass and cheer them on. You can't wave a Canadian flag for them. And they also said, to this day, have no idea how they plan to enforce this, that financing it was wrong. So this thing has raised about $10 million in a GoFundMe convoy. Wow. Under the Nova Scotia order, it would be illegal to donate to that GoFundMe. Now, again, I've not heard of anyone being charged, but in the eyes of this government, which I should tell you has a conservative leader, a conservative party is in power in Nova Scotia, they've decided that it is illegal to support a peaceful protest.
Now that is, but that is really frightening to me. When a province can come in on, a state here in the U.S. could come in and ban support of something, or like you say, ban standing by the side of the road and cheering it. That is insane dictatorship in Nova Scotia. Do Canadians feel the same way, Andrew? Did that register any Canadian freak out?
Well, it does, and I think that's why the Nova Scotia, or that's why the convoy has had such popularity in Canada. I would say a few weeks ago, a lot of people would have probably gone along with it, but a lot of these government overreaches have really poked the bear now collectively. Like, just to give you one example, Quebec, which is a bit of a weird province just because it's structured very differently. It has a different legal system. Its language is French. But Quebec has been the most aggressive in North America as far as COVID restrictions go. Like, you think like Gavin Newsom in California or Andrew Cuomo in New York were bad. No, this province had a curfew in effect where you couldn't be outside your homes after a certain time. They announced a few weeks ago that they were going to fine anyone who wasn't vaccinated. They rolled that back today. They've abandoned it. But what's happening in Quebec is that there are more Quebecers than I've ever seen at any protest ever supporting the Freedom Convoy because the government just has been that oppressive. And I think it's similar in Nova Scotia, where they probably did more to bolster support for the convoy by trying to ban support than they did had they just left it alone and let them drive through.
Now, Andrew, is it true? I'm not sure it's true. This could be incorrect. But is it true they're putting masks on poutine?
I know, yeah, that's actually under the Canadian Constitution the only time you don't need to wear a mask, when you're eating poutine.
Okay, good, because I like poutine, and therefore would be offended if it was masked, because the masks are not yummy. Now,
real poutine, not shredded these curds.
Oh, here we go. Let's hear. We got one other clip from the great interviews you did up there. And by the way, these interviews, I'm going to guess. Speaking as a fellow journalist, I watched enough. I'm guessing this is your method. You just walked up to people and started talking to them, right? There was no pre-screening or anything, correct? You really just walked up to people and talked to them, right?
Yeah, there were a couple of politicians that I knew would be there that I was keeping an eye out for, but for the most part, I would just see them, and I had a camera guy there with me, and if we just saw them, we just walk up and talk to them. Certainly anyone who wasn't a politician, those were just like random people that I saw that looked like they had something to say.
Yeah, and that's to me a great way to do it, because you do get a real sense of what the people think, you know. And so let's play this other clip, Saul.
Why are you on Parliament Hill? Why wouldn't I be? This is democracy. This is what democracy is all about. People believe that the government has overstepped with mandates, and they're here to exercise their democratic right. People give the government the power to act in accordance with their values. The government does not have any independent power. It is us that confer the power on the government. And where they overstep, the people have a right to voice their opinions. What we've seen in the last year with demonization of people, turning people against each other, the hatred that has been spewed from the highest levels is completely unacceptable. And the people have had enough. And so they're here to voice their opinions, and I support any peaceful act of democracy. And all I've seen here is loving, law-abiding Canadians expressing their voice, which they're entitled to do. So why wouldn't I be here?
Now, Jason, you can't see the footage, but that was a woman completely covered head to toe in swastika tattoos. No, wait a second. I'm sorry. No, she was black. Forgive me. I was confused there. And not Trudeau black. Right. Correct? Andrew, you remember interviewing that woman? She was a lovely young black woman who was up there, and who I'm sure you just saw her. And if there were racists, they're the kind of person she wouldn't like, correct?
Yeah, she's a conservative member of parliament, actually.
Is she?
Yeah.
How did that happen? How did they let a black woman be a conservative member of parliament? Didn't they throw her out?
This is the problem. You have this reputation that the Liberals try to paint of them as being racist. She ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party it was in 2020, and she was an unknown politically. She had never been elected to office before, but she was she was an electrifying personality. She really spoke to small C conservatives, and then she just got elected to Parliament in September, and she's become, interestingly enough, you want to talk about Erin O'Toole, she's been shoved to the backbench of the backbench because she has been speaking out against vaccine mandates, and that's not exactly flown in O'Toole's version of what the Conservative Party is supposed to be. But as you hear, she has a lot of good things to say, and I think if O'Toole does get turfed, she's going to be a contender to replace him.
You know what I think is actually racist, Andrew? When people in the American media refer to Drake as African American, that's racist against Canadians.
Yeah, he's this is where the Canadian stereotypes are bad, because I've actually met Drake back when he was called Aubrey, and he was on a Canadian show called Degrassi that you may be familiar with.
Yes.
Nope.
No, that's right. He was on Degrassi, which, by the way, filmmaker Kevin Smith, he really loved that show too. By the way, Jason, because he talked to me about it. But
I haven't seen it. But he's African Canadian, not African American, right? He's just Canadian, in my opinion. But whatever,
He's Jewish Canadian. He'll throw you for a loop there. He's.
I think I knew that, actually. And speaking of that. You know what is a huge dust-up of racism? You got Whoopi Goldberg slamming Joe Rogan and everybody about everything. Her real name is Karen Johnson. And as a Jewish person, I am offended by her cultural appropriation of the name Goldberg while she's out there saying that the Holocaust had nothing to do with race.
It's
a joke.
So, Andrew, where do you think it's going to go from here? You had people like the actor Russell Brand come out and complimented this as a very creative protest. And I agree. Doing this gigantic truck convoy, which the media completely ignored, even though it seems like it's the biggest convoy in world history. Is that right? Where do you think it goes from here, Andrew? We only got a few seconds left.
Sure. They've said they're not going anywhere. The truckers have said they are staying put until all the vaccine mandates and COVID restrictions are gone. They've got $10 million in the bank. They've got more support than can count, and they're saying they're in it for the long haul.
Long haul truckers. Andrew Lawton, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome back on the show anytime. Jason, great job co-hosting. Also want to thank John Schweppe for joining us earlier in the show. Thanks for Tarif for the call, and Ingrid. We'll be back tomorrow on the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory.